No good morning for episode 2, much to the delight of Las Vegas Chris, who's listening to the episode and texts me frequently about how many times I say good morning. And when he's trying to listen to 10 previews in a day to catch up, he gets a little frustrated because maybe it's not that good of a morning where you need to say it 10 times. So we're moving right along. Episode 2 of Thursday, third highest rated team in the league, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a rating of 84. And if you're keeping score at home, you know exactly which two teams from the AFC are coming tomorrow. Both of those are going to be very fun episodes when we talk about team number 2 and team number 1 in the NFL, one of which I have a little bit of, I'll call it an apology to do. So I'll leave that teaser for tomorrow. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you listen to the podcast consistently last season, especially towards the latter chunk of the year, you would have heard me referencing the interviews and the quotes coming out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers locker room about how disjointed things were and then how important the bye week was to the Bucs as a team in week 13. And it was consistently in the press. Like, it wasn't hard to find. I just don't know if necessarily people were looking for it. And the sort of point of this, to reiterate it for the 100th time here on the show, was everything was out of sync for the Buccaneers between Brady, the receivers, the play calling, what Arians wanted from the offense, what Brady wanted from the offense. It was a huge issue. And the bye week was viewed as that late season reset where everything got on the same page. The play calling shifted. The play design shifted slightly. It put everyone in a better situation. And then we saw the Buccaneers rattle off 8 straight wins. Their offense looked phenomenal down the stretch. And they obviously closed with the Super Bowl win, dominating the Kansas City Chiefs, who were playing with a backup offensive line. That was really the season for the Bucs in a nutshell, because you remember coming into last season, there were all those new pieces. The secondary was the youngest in the league. Obviously, Tom Brady moving in. There were additional weapons that were being shifted around. Like, the continuity for a team in an offseason where there was no preseason and all of the joint practices were limited and all the restrictions. It was right at the peak of the pandemic. There were a lot of people who looked at the Buccaneers and said that they just can't make this work. And that was really the sentiment going into the latter part of November, whether it be that dud of a game against the Saints where they got absolutely blown out, that game against Kansas City where they fell behind by 4 touchdowns early and were absolutely dominated, and the second sort of chunk post-bye looked at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a very, very different way. And so I mentioned Clev TA on the last episode where I was talking about the San Francisco 49ers, but he, myself, Hitman, who I mentioned on another show, just both of those guys are brilliant football follows. And there was somebody else, I feel bad because the handle's losing in the back of my head on who it was, but there was a conversation going on Twitter. And we were saying, so despite all of this last year, there's really 2 ways you can look at the Bucs. The most popular way to look at them this offseason is that all of this occurred pre-bye. They sorted it out post-bye. And now coming into 2021, they've had the full offseason to continue on the newfound continuity they discovered post-bye. And it's like, if they could win the Super Bowl with all those issues last year, what do they look like going into 2021 with all this time to come together and prep? They return all 22 starters. I'm sure you've heard that 500 times from every preview show on earth. But that's a very real view. The other one, which sort of piqued my attention, and I was like, oh yeah, that did happen. If we think back to last year, if Jared Cook doesn't fumble going across midfield for the Saints, the Bucs in that playoff game against Drew Brees with half an arm, a dozen cracked ribs, and God knows what else was wrong with his body, they were on their way to lose that game. I was betting on the Bucs in that game, and like, if you were watching it, you know that was a very dire situation. That fumble from Cook absolutely changed everything. And then you move on to the NFC Championship against the Green Bay Packers. That long touchdown where Kevin King got burned at the very end of the half completely flipped that game around. You move one step further into the Super Bowl, and this is the best front 7 in football going up against the Kansas City Chiefs with 5 different starters on their offensive line who were backups or playing in a different position. And so all three playoff games, even Washington to an extent, with Heineke at quarterback, gave the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a very, very good game in the postseason. And so that finish down the stretch post-bye in the regular season was against a very easy slate of opponents. So it was great time out of the bye to get things right for the Buccaneers. But then in each of the playoff games, it wasn't this dominant performance against teams that were at full health and elite on the other side. Like, each of those teams were either giving them a very difficult game despite something. Breeze is the quarterback, the Packers with that play, the Kansas City Chiefs with a completely retooled offensive line that sort of aided the Tampa Bay Buccaneers into those victories. This is not discounting everything they did, but it's a different way to look at it. And that conversation on Twitter sort of related that back to everybody at the start of the year last season, for the most part, having issues with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and how the roster was constructed and all of the potential issues between the coaching staff and Brady. It's important to remember that was very real. The people who were saying all of that and didn't see this as a smooth transition, they were all right. And it took a 7-5 start for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to realize how much of an issue it was, and then really scramble to change things late in the year, and then get some fortunate matchup situations in the playoffs that really helped them along the way. And so there's two very distinct ways to look at the Buccaneers coming into 2021 and how you feel about each of that. And more importantly, if you were able to stay consistent with one of those two views for the duration of last season and maybe not switch, you're going to look at this team and a win total of 11.5 and the second shortest odds to win the Super Bowl in a very different way. I tend to lean towards the fact that, like, I'm not going out of my way to bet Tampa Bay futures. I'm not going out of my way to bet the over on the win total. This team is going to be very, very good. And I think they're fairly priced. I don't think you're getting value going over the Bucs in any situation here. But I'm certainly not going out of my way to bet against them. This defense is most likely going to be the best unit in the NFL. That secondary that was the youngest last year, they played to the 5th highest level. They ranked number 5 in pass efficiency defense despite the age. They're all returning, and they're all a year better, and they're all a year more acclimated to this system under Todd Bowles, who all of them speak extremely highly of. This front seven is going to be absolutely dominant against the run. You can't move anything up the middle against Sue and Vea. It's not happening. And then you have Barrett and Paul off the edges, and two brilliant linebackers, Levante David, one of the most underrated players in the NFL, and Devin White next to him, a huge vocal leader within this team. Like, this defense is absolutely loaded. And when you look at the schedule, opponents for offensive efficiency, the Bucs are going to face the 7th easiest. For opposing quarterbacks, Tampa Bay faces the 2nd easiest schedule of opposing QBs. So not only is this defense going to be absolutely loaded, but all of a sudden they face one of the easiest schedules in the NFL for opposing offenses and opposing quarterbacks. This team is not giving up a ton of points. And so whatever you might think of Brady and his age and this offense and the play calling and whether it carries over, the continuity, whatever your stance is on either side of that, it's really not going to matter because it's going to be incredibly difficult to score on this team. It's amazing how the schedule ultimately lined up, and it's against the strength of this Buccaneers team. And it's weird to call something other than this offense and all of the weapons that they have a strength on a team, but it's like this defense is absolutely loaded. Offensive schedule, almost the exact same as last year. Gets a little bit more difficult for opposing defenses, gets a little bit more difficult for opposing pass and rush defenses, but it's not a gigantic jump forward. Overall, last year they faced the 12th easiest schedule of opposing defenses. This year it jumps to 11th. So it's an increase in difficulty, but it's not one where you're ringing the alarm bells and sounding any concerns. And with Evans, Godwin, Gronkowski, Brown, Fournette, Jones in the backfield with Brady behind this offensive line, might not matter a whole lot either. And so I think with this extremely high price point, the Bucs are priced correctly. And the reason that I have them in third relative to the other two teams that I'm going to talk about tomorrow is simply looking at the quarterback and weapon situation, looking at the schedule overall, and then just the value that I'm putting on the coach and quarterback combination. And in two of these teams tomorrow, the offensive coordinator and the quarterback combination as well. And the gap, I'll tell you, the top rated team that I have in the NFL is 88. The Buccaneers are an 84. The second highest rated team is an 86. The difference between that is 1.5 points on a neutral. So it's a very, very minimal difference between how these two teams are ultimately rated versus the Buccaneers. And so I think it's very tight at the top. I think there's a very clear divide between the 49ers, the Buccaneers, and the two teams we're talking about tomorrow and the rest of the NFL when it comes to who can actually win a Super Bowl and sustain the talent that they have for the course of the season. And so Buccaneers right in the middle of that and could very easily be a team that just gets adjusted up as they continue to steamroll opponents throughout the course of this season. And so price is high, favored in every single game, rightfully so. This is going to be a great team, but I think they're priced accurately. I'm not going to be betting against them, but it's going to take a pretty unusual situation to bet on them from a spread perspective. But certainly I think value, opponent team totals under, a lot of potential to back this defense into doing great things in 2021. And again, like that sounds like I'm disregarding the offense, but Buccaneers loaded going into 2021. That'll do it for me today. Enjoy your Thursday. I'll talk to you tomorrow.